Steve Morgan is a native Welshman who recently decided to call Australia home. In the UK, music was his life. If he wasn't making it, he was writing about it. And if he wasn't writing about it, he was certainly talking about it. But since moving down under, he's discovered the music scene is somewhat different here. And while he continues to write about the music he loves, he's now added stand-up comedy to his creative routine. Funny that. Tonight he gets to spin a bunch of tunes around a chosen theme for the segment we call High Fidelity. And a heads up here, Steve's musical bent is very much flavoured by post-punk. So if you find your fragile sensibilities somewhat shocked by the harder edge of rock and roll with questionable lyrics, you might prefer a good book with a nice cup of tea. Alternatively, if you're up for a bit of a sonic assault, stay tuned. Steve Morgan, welcome to High Fidelity. Thanks for coming on board.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you have been previously a panellist on Eat the Week because you are a font of so much wisdom and knowledge, of course. Oof. But you probably, I don't know, do you think you're better known as a comedian or as a music journalist? Because it's an interesting double bill, isn't it?
It really is. And I almost feel like it depends on which continent we're talking.
Okay.
I moved to Australia in 2014, and up until that point, music was my everything. I was a nerd, I was a fanatic, I made music, I recorded, I produced. Everything that I did, was revolved around music. I also reviewed. I also just talked about it until people got absolutely sick of me talking about it. But I was also involved in a project called Neon Highwire, which was with two very dear friends as well. And as a lot of people who've been involved in musical projects, I'm sure can testify, that it's very much like a relationship. The way that you kind of have that to and fro, the sort of the compromises, the way of kind of seeing someone else trying to bring the best out of them, and sometimes someone not being in the mood for it, but then you're trying to actually get the best out of the limited time that you have together, and all these sorts of things where you have these arguments and all this kind of this toing and froing. But then when I moved to Australia, I did actually try out with some other people. I just put some thing on Gumtree. I didn't know anyone here. I was like, hey, who wants to jam? I like these bands.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, it was like when you've just come out of a long-term relationship and you just feel like, oh God, this feels wrong. I'm still thinking of my ex.
But there is an implicit understanding that happens when you're creating music with other people and finding like-minded souls that have that same connection. And I guess it's informed by the music that you all appreciate in a shared sense. There's always going to be differences on certain fronts musically, but it's the shared appreciation, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like that combination of the differences and that actually make you appreciate some other input of someone else, but also that common ground that means that you can appreciate their ideas and kind of actually have something to go with. Because if you've got like a classical musician and someone who's kind of like into grime, then they're going to struggle to find that common ground.
Just a bit.
Yes, exactly. And it'll be more of a kind of a distant sort of, I get what you're doing. Good for you. As opposed to having that something which you can both like sink your teeth into.
So does that mean that you don't think you'll jam with anyone else again or play with anyone? Did you ever play professionally, by the way, or no?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to say what professional is. I mean, we released albums, we toured, we did things like this.
So you got paid for gigs?
Yes,
you're professional.
Yes, and and because of the nature of the music, we played a lot of clubs, which meant a lot of late nights, which was, as you get older as well, you kind of like, oh, God, this is difficult, isn't it? It's like, oh, we're not playing till 1 a.m. That's
past my bedtime.
Exactly, yeah.
Rock and roll. So it's part of the aging process, and obviously the relocation to another country and maybe not finding quite the same simpatico. But the good thing is you can always, somewhere along the line connect with someone, and even if you just do it for the joy of it. Absolutely. In your garage or whatever it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I still do like little pieces here and there recording, but because I've shifted my focus more to comedy since coming here, I do find that the songs that I do end up writing or have written since I've gotten here and released have definitely had a lot more of a carefree style to them that perhaps doesn't have that same level of intensity or message that I maybe fooled myself into thinking I once had.
Oh, when you were a serious young insect, right?
Yeah.
Now, I wonder about this because your chosen theme certainly has a comedic element to it. How did you come up with the top 5 songs with meaningless lyrics?
Right. So this comes down to music, to the fact that I write a lot, to comedy, to everything. It's just that you do tend to find, particularly when people are deconstructing music, they will focus on the lyrics a lot because lyrics are tangible. They're things which you can write down, you can dissect, you can apply to poetry, essentially, the same kind of criticism. However, I'm just the sort of person for whom, in most instances, lyrics are just so secondary. And I think that a lot of people, that's the same, but they just aren't willing to admit it because the communication comes not necessarily through what's being said, but the way it's being said or how it fits in and how that kind of vagueness, you can really kind of interpret something of your own into it.
It's all about the feel. The emotion.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, all right. So the songs you've chosen, are they songs that you like, but the words have no significant impact on the songs themselves? Or are you taking shots at these songs because their lyrics are so meaningless?
Oh, no. These are definitely not songs I'm taking shots at. These are songs which I think are absolutely magnificent. But if you actually looked at what's being sung about or what the subject matter is, then you'll probably regret it.
All right. And this all came from a podcast you were listening to from Malcolm Gladwell. What was his point?
That's right. I mean, I love Malcolm Gladwell. I think he's an incredible person. I think he has some incredible points to make. But whenever he goes into the subject of music, I always find myself gritting my teeth and clinging onto the side of my chair and going, "What are you doing, Malcolm?" And he had a recent. He has the Revisionist History podcast, which is very successful. It's very interesting. But he had this one subject matter where he was basically discussing how the specificity in lyrics is what makes a song a true classic, a true something which transcends the ages. So the point being that, and his examples often came from country music, that if you've got something where someone is, they're saying like, "Oh, I sat in a chair and I poured a glass of whiskey and it was the 4th whiskey of the day," those real kind of like vivid mental images, that essentially you create something that's on another level to something that's more abstract. The counterpoint he was actually using was Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones, which I thought, what a terrible counterpoint, because it's a great song.
Yeah, it is a great song. Yeah, I know, really, wow. Not in Malcolm's estimation. Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Stay away from deconstructing music, Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah,
leave it to the professionals like Steve Morgan. Okay, so where are we going to start?
So we're starting with a band from, mostly from my home country, in fact, called Future of the Left. A band very dear to me, a band I've seen double figures numbers of times live, who I absolutely adore because of their whimsical combination of very aggressively intensive rock music and the sort of lyrics which just are so off the wall that you just can't help but notice them, but in a way that just throws you, and you feel like constantly like, this isn't what rock bands are supposed to be singing about.
Well, with this particular song, frontman Andy Falco says that people have mistaken them for a comedy band.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because this one I think was this particular song I chose because with that kind of element, that those almost comedic elements that they have to the lyrics, although that's kind of, I think, a bit liberal to describe it that way, that this one, they basically willfully went, you know what, this is what you wanted. Here is the song that is so beyond ridiculous, that talks about Kim Kardashian being chased through the woods by a giant bear wearing a mask that carries the visage of recently deceased film director Michael Winner. And just goes with it in a regional English accent, such as the chic for the WTF type of attitude that people tend to love these days.
Well, let's check it out. This is The Future of the Left. And be warned, some questionable lyrics. So if you are easily offended, you might want to avoid the next 4.5 minutes on the radio.
The music industry is lying to you. It is telling you that you are excited. And you are excited. And you are excited. Or rather, you have confused excitement with the fear of missing out, which is understandable as these two feelings are very closely related, focusing as they do on the heart and the groin and ending in a bloody mess, pregnancy tests and too little sleep. Our survey says that shouting inanities in a regional accent is valuable to culture. Look at EastEnders, Soccer AM, or the Queen's Speech. Our survey says paedophiles run the BBC, but look at the alternatives. Drowning men clutching at straws through their bell-end helmets, sad woman dreaming of being owned by them, their children eventual despoilers of high streets, clad head to toe in menstrual blood, screaming sexual insults into bedroom mirrors in the sad belief it will empower them. And it will empower them. And it will empower them. At least that's what it says on my cereal packet. That's what it says on my receipt from the Apple Store. Good Lord. I cannot identify the bloodied bodies of my loved ones. They were killed whilst watching a new television show on the MTV network. One where Kim Kardashian is chased through woodland by a giant bear wearing a mask which carries the visage of recently deceased film director Michael Winner. The bear has apparently not qualified for a workplace pension and is angry with Daniel Day-Lewis for what he perceives to be the relative lack of action in There Will Be Blood, which he otherwise enjoyed but found a little precious for his tastes. Anyway, after 20 minutes of panicked running around, intercut with interviews with friends and other celebrities, the production team behind the show all simultaneously come to the same horrifying conclusion. They have wasted the precious gift of life which has been given to them by science. They start attacking themselves with the nearest available objects, breaking off camera tripods to ram them bloodily into each other's eyes, climbing up the highest branches of trees to fall face down onto the pulsing earth, the whole time shrieking and screaming with the sudden primal vigor of lost souls who have forgotten language and seem intent on shouting their black hearts from their grey and semi-erect chests. Quite. They face the pigs. They face the pigs they were. They face the pigs. They face the pigs they were. Anyway, my family members, otherwise enjoying a restful Sunday afternoon spent basking in the Christian lie of a benevolent and loving God, witnessed this horror through the prism of their television set. Concentrated howl of psychic and bloodied anguish which has utterly enveloped the unlikely woodland scene is transmitted directly into the heart of our living room. And it bursts from the screen and into their eyes and their hearts and their minds and their tits and their bits. It bursts from the screen and into their eyes and their hearts and their minds and their tits and their bits. It bursts from the screen and into their eyes and their hearts and their minds and their tits and their bits. It bursts from the screen and into their eyes and their hearts and their minds and their tits and their bits. It bursts from the screen and into their eyes and their hearts and their minds and their tits and their bits.
ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland. You're listening to High Fidelity with musician, comedian and music writer Steve Morgan. The future of the left's the singing of the Bonesaws. Just remember, the music industry is lying to you. But Steve Morgan is not, okay? Definitely not. So when you write, like, where would people see your writing about music? You talk about the essence of deconstructing music. Where can they see yours?
Yeah, so in Australia, I write for Scenester, AAA Backstage, the AU Review. I write for a number of different magazines, depending on... A lot of them have different different slants.
So you have to tailor your work to that?
It's more the opposite way around. If I've got something and I kind of think, this is, I think this would be something more suitable to that, then I'll approach them first and say, I want to go to this or I want to cover that. And it works better that way because I'm the sort of contrary person who, if they tell me what to do, I'll go, I don't want to do this and do a bad job of it. But I also used to write for a lot of sites and magazines in the UK as well. I recently covered a band called My Vitriol, who were very upset with the 16-year review I gave of their career, where they essentially, for a solid 16 years, promised the release of their second album for years and years and years, constantly saying it's coming out next year, we're almost there, we've almost finished it. And then even starting in 2013, a Kickstarter campaign to get some money to fund this. And bear in mind, that's a good 12 years after the first album came out.
Jeez.
And took thousands of pounds of their fans' money and ended up releasing an album which... Well, no, they were very keen to point out it's not an album, it's a collection of songs. Which contained, some pre-release materials and B-sides and things along this line. And the reaction from the band wasn't great when the article went online. It's been but it's a weird sort of situation where I kind of, where I have people contacting me regularly about them, people who've had legal threats thrown their way, who said, I've had legal threats from this band because I posted a negative comment about them online. And I saw you wrote this article about them, and I was just wondering if you've had something similar.
Something similar, yeah.
So I feel like I've got this kind of counselling service now that I apply to anyone who's dealt with my vitriol.
Vitriol, indeed. Yes. All right, let's get on to your next choice. From an album that was considered, well, really, one of the most lauded indie rock albums of the 80s, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, this is the Pixies with Bone Machine. And you know what? It's hard to pick from a lot of Frank Black's earlier lyrics because of the fact that, he says himself that it would be very much kind of spur of the moment, coming up with things, the sound, the fact that he'd throw things from English to Spanish to whatever suited that moment. And I don't think that anyone who's listened to the Pixies can say that, I just wish he had a more coherent narrative to the things that he was singing. Because, I just feel in that period, that Surfer Rosa Doolittle period, oh my God, that man was just untouchable. Those lyrics, those vocals are just incredible. And I still hear them. They still put, the hairs on my arms on end, which, yeah.
Well, it could go from extremes, really, to the extreme sense musically to the most melodic, beautiful melodic forms.
Yeah, he uses his voice as almost like it's an instrument. It's not just about the melody. It's about the syncopations, it's about the yelps and screams that kind of come out of him. But it's all done in a way that's just so. It is. They're basically pop songs. Nirvana themselves said that they were ripping them off. But nonetheless, Bone Machine I chose because the lyrics are quite forefront to the song and just so ridiculous.
But so good.
So good. I know. You just want to. You just can't help but sing along to the chorus, even though you're essentially just singing about a bone having a little machine.
Let's check it out. From Surfer Rosa, this is the Pixies and Bone Machine on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland. High Fidelity, it is the Pixies with Bone Machine, and our musicologist, our guest musicologist this week is a music writer, comedian and musician, Steve Morgan, thinking that from my experience that music journalism doesn't really pay the rent, so stand-up comedy is where it's at. That's where you're making your millions these days.
That's kind of out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of mentality, isn't it? No, I mean, stand-up music, you know, a lot of the arts are kind of devoid of any sustainable financial career prospects.
Money? What's that?
Exactly. Yeah, we've got exposure for you to live on.
Yes, welcome to the world of exploitation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean, I do. I mean, I also work in IT, so that's the only thing I do which really makes any money. I mean, you know, the other things I get paid for, but let's be fair, that the amount of expenses that goes into it, you know, if you were looking at it on an hourly rate, then I'd be better off as an Uber driver. So, yeah.
And they don't make that much. So it really is for love, not for money. Again, a refresher, the theme is songs with meaningless lyrics, but amazing songs. And this is an interesting choice because I wouldn't have necessarily picked it given what I think is your musical bent, but sonically very much in that kind of widescreen thing that Sigur Ros do.
Yes.
Why did you go for this? Is it TAC? Was that their first album or their second album?
No, that was third.
Third album, was it?
Yeah. So, I mean, this was, you know, after, I think this was kind of, you know, after the open-close brackets one that kind of introduced, that really kind of made them explode in popularity.
That's right. Yeah.
This was the third album. I literally just went for this one because I was trying not to be too obvious with my choice. So, but yeah, I mean, the reason, I mean, and I get where you're going with the kind of the genre and the style and everything, and I do feel that perhaps I've gone very guitar heavy with my choices on this, but I think maybe that's just the nature of the subject that I chose. But no, Sigur Ros, I mean, they invented their own language, which I think is just amazing. I mean, it's like they appreciate that the majority of their listeners are going to speak English, not speak Icelandic, small population and a lot of international success.
Yes.
And I just love the idea that they went, you know what? Because all of that open-close brackets album was written in this Hopelandic language that they
Valenska
invented.
or something, isn't
That's
it?
it, yes. That's it in Icelandic.
Yeah.
And
You're just making it up.
Exactly, I know. And they even confessed themselves. They said that it's like, we were writing the songs, and I was coming up with the melodies, and I was making some sounds, which a lot of vocalists can empathise with. Except he stopped there and said, "Nope, it's a new language. I'm done. Next."
The thing that I love about it is that it's a scat form of gibberish, but unless you speak Icelandic, how could you tell which was Icelandic and which was Hopelandic? It's not the same.
I know. And it says a lot that I was like, oh, of course, Sigur Ros singing Hopelandic. And I was kind of like, wait, is that every one of their songs? I had to Google it. I had to kind of go, which one's gibberish and which one's Icelandic?
But it sounds great.
Exactly.
So from TAC, this is Sigur Ros and Gong on ABC Radio, Brisbane and Queensland. You're listening to High Fidelity, the segment that comes up with a theme. A guest chooses a theme and 5 songs based around that theme. Our guest is comedian and music writer and musician Steve Morgan. His theme is his top 5 songs with meaningless lyrics, and I don't think anyone could argue with anything from Sigur Ros on that front. I've got no idea what they're singing about, but it does sound fabulous. This next choice, Steve, massive hardcore, or sort of, I think they're sort of called post-hardcore band, but this record has been considered so influential in retrospect, and yet I know members of the band can't stand it. Like, you know, it's a weird record when you think about it.
Absolutely, yeah, especially because it came out and they disbanded not long after that. And
they had the biggest success, and now it's time to break up. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I've worn it round like an albatross ever since. But that's because it was an incredible album. I mean, this was At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command, and yeah, it was like nothing I'd heard before. In the combination of basically it's hardcore intensity, but nonetheless, but just recorded with like such like a clear, crisp production. There's certain bands who are just, they can really do something amazing on stage, and then they really struggle to reproduce that in the studio. Especially bands who've got something that's a lot looser, a lot kind of like more frenetic. And I feel that Relationship of Command was one of those few albums that managed to just basically get all of this wild like fire all over the place and actually commit it to a record. And it's something which the band had never done before, never managed to achieve before, and I'm sure I'll annoy a lot of Mars Volta fans, but have never really achieved since.
Yeah, right. Mars Volta and Sparta being the 2 bands that came out of it. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So Mars Volta being the better of the 2, in my opinion. You basically had the band split up because you had the 2 kind of like wildly creative parts of the band, and then you had 3 perhaps more just making rock music type of thing people. I don't know how to kind of say that in a nice way, but there was the combination of like having that really creative spark and that really kind of like tight like rhythm section essentially that made them so good, but then made those 2 other bands just a little bit too much.
I hear you. Tell me about the madness of the lyrics. I'm dancing on the corpse's ashes. What does this song mean?
Well, this is the funny thing, right? Because back when it was just At the Drive-In, there were a lot of people who would kind of, they were a very popular, very influential band, so a lot of people would dissect the lyrics and kind of just, and they didn't really talk about their lyric writing or the songwriting process. They were very sort of much just like, here's the music, let it speak for itself. And this song is supposed to be about the Mexican maquiladoras, which are essentially factories where the Americans put out kind of like raw materials into Mexico. They get made into products which are then put in so that they don't have to pay as much on tax. And the bad things that have happened in these factories, basically.
Yeah. Exploiting the labour and all that sort of stuff, yeah.
Absolutely. And it was kind of like, and when you put that theme to these lyrics, people would go like, yeah, I can see where they're going with this. And that's like, it's quite beautifully put. It's quite kind of like, that's quite poetic. That's quite a, a vivid sort of picture that they've achieved. Then years later in the Mars Volta, they started, relax. They got a bit older. They chilled out a bit. They relaxed. And next thing you know, they're kind of like going, yeah, I just, make stuff up, and then we just sort of, see what fits. And sometimes we change it. We don't usually change it. And then you started to look back at these lyrics with a different slant, and you think, he's just saying weird words together. And then afterwards going, what did I say?
So at the time, when you listened to Invalid, Litter Department, did you think that it had this deeper meaning, and it's
Absolutely.
only in retrospect?
Yeah. So
do you feel you've been cheated? Like,
well, that's the thing, right? And that's what I guess it made this such a perfect choice for this list is that and at first, I'll admit, I thought, hang on a second, I've been hoodwinked. But over time I was kind of like, but it's still a great song. I still love the song. I still love the track. I still love that sound. And I still think that the ferocity, the kind of the real kind of like the raw emotion that came through him singing that, does it really take anything away? Does it, thinking myself as well is kind of like when we're the conscious brain, the subconscious brain, what's truly doing the writing, etc., etc. I was like, anyway, maybe I'm just justifying it in my head, but it still didn't change it from being an absolute classic to me.
talkies that knock the pins down as her shoes grip the dirt floor in the silhouette of dying. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. Yeah, they had plans for him, and they had spun the last of the pimps. Polyester satin nail jewelry lips, while the guillotine just laughed again. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. And the paramedics fell into the wound like a rehired scab at a barehanded plant, an anesthetic penance beneath the hail of contraband. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. On my way, near broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, near broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. And been excommunicated, and all the pulses were subverted, and they made sure that the obituaries showed pictures of smokestacks. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. A vivid dissection that mocked the strut of vivisection, a semi-automatic colony, and a silencing that still walks the streets. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. When the company of wolves was a stretcher made of cobblestone curfews, as the Federales performed their custodial customs quite well. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. Intravenously collided was the walkie-talkies that had knocked the pins down as her shoes lay dangling on the dirt floor in the silhouette of dying. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. The paramedics had fallen into the wound like a rehired scab at a barehanded plant, an anesthetic penance beneath the hail of contraband. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way, nails broken fell into the wishing well, wishing well, wishing well. On my way. Dancing on the corpse's ashes. Dancing on the corpse's ashes.
On ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland, it's High Fidelity. Steve Morgan is our guest, and the theme is the top 5 songs with meaningless lyrics. 4 down, 1 to go, Steve. And this band from New York's indie rock scene, they didn't really take off until later on in their careers. Might have been their debut, was it, from their debut album, I think?
Yeah.
So what was it about this particular band that appealed to you? And then we'll get on to this song.
Well, they may have had more commercial success as their career progressed, but I think that they never, ever managed to outlive that first album of theirs, Turn on the Bright Lights.
So many people say that, don't they? Oh, it's like, I like your old stuff better than your new stuff, or, you never got better than that first album.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and I guess it really does. I mean, bands like Radiohead, they managed to get past that by having a terrible first album, but
and still managed to get a career going.
Exactly, which I think maybe some people don't have the luxury of these days.
No.
But Interpol, no, they Turn on the Bright Lights. Basically, it was like the Pitchfork album of the year at the time. It was that album which basically everyone who heard it went like, oh look, it's Joy Division, but it's not Joy Division. But it was good enough that, even the sort of fan who was a fan of Joy Division could still appreciate it and go, this is amazing. This is like a one great song after another type of album. And again, this was another one where it's like, when you hear Paul Banks singing these lyrics and hear the sort of like the stark melodies, the empty like reverb that just, where everything drops away but the guitar and that really depressed vocal. And then you find out he's singing lines like, her stories are boring and stuff. She's always calling my bluff.
Yeah, or she can read. She's bad. What does that mean?
I mean, reading's great. People should read more.
I've got to say, out of all your choices, the lyrics of this are probably the worst of all. And that includes Sigur Ros, and I've got no idea what they're singing about.
No, and that's the thing, and that's what I think is just so great about this, is that it doesn't really take away from it. It's still a classic album, and you still can't help but feel, that when those moments happen, when it just all drops away, that you still kind of get into it and think like, oh, that poor guy. But nonetheless, I mean, he's a terrible lyricist.
But you're a fan.
I'm still a fan.
All right, let's go out with Interpol, Obstacle 1 from Turn on the Bright Lights. Steve Morgan, thanks for being my guest on High Fidelity.
Thank you for inviting me.
Interpol wrapping up Steve Morgan's high fidelity theme of songs with meaningless lyrics. It's 8 minutes to 10 on ABC Radio Brisbane in Queensland. Philip Clark is standing by and he's fired up for another edition of The Nightlife. G'day, Phil.
G'day, Grief, Trev. As if safe to come back in the building.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Rocking tonight.
We are indeed. Are you rocking tonight? That's the question.
We are rocking tonight.